Welcome to Startup Face Off. This is a healthy, open-ended discussion. We want everybody to have full different points of view, and I think the value is when we actually disagree on things because there's never a one-size solution for anyone. And with that, I want to introduce my panelists, and we'll start with you, Josh from Visto AI. Introduce yourself, Josh.
Awesome. Thanks, Craig, for having me. My name is Josh. I'm a Canadian immigration lawyer. I specialize in helping international students and skilled workers from around the world navigate the Canadian immigration process. About a year ago, I co-founded Visto. It's a free platform helping individuals who are interested in Canada learn more about the study permit, work permit, getting PR in Canada, all that good kind of stuff. Totally free to sign up at visto.ai or type my name in on LinkedIn. Feel free to connect there as well if you have any questions.
Thank you. And Alex from Equivesto.
Thanks, Craig. I'm Alex, co-founder and managing director of Equivesto. Equivesto is a new equity crowdfunding platform operating in Canada. We actually just launched about a week ago, and we've got our first deal live on the platform right now, with a few more deals coming in the next few weeks. If you're looking to raise between $25,000 and $1.5 million for your company, making use of your existing community, we can help you do that.
Thank you, Alex. And Anatoly.
Hello, everyone. Anatoly from Pact here. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Pact. I'm a second-time founder. I'm an ex-BMO AML investigator. And at Pact, we're trying to change the way how businesses and entrepreneurs would communicate with their external counterparties and enter into deals. We are providing a combination of a professional chat and a set of tools which would help frequent deal makers all along the way, from negotiation to formalizing the document to signing it to paying off the contract and managing their ongoing relationships in the same place without compromising speed and legal security. I'm happy to be here and hope that we'd have an interesting chat today.
So this is Startup Face Off Round 2. We did the first one in August, so this is our second one. And if you didn't watch the first one, it's kind of an open discussion and chat. Every one of our panelists have brought a couple of questions to the table, and they'll introduce them as we go. And we're just going to talk about what we feel and give our advice and talk about where we are in our experiences in the startup community related to that. So, Josh, why don't we kick it off with you? What's your first question?
Yeah, so my first question is, how important is following your passion in business? And maybe just to quickly give some background, just thinking about it a lot more, especially as now I'm working on my Visto as my second business. We hear a lot about follow your passion and how important that is. And you see it, how important it is in certain parts, but you see the importance of other aspects in other parts. So wanted to hear some other people's thoughts.
Who wants to jump in on this one first?
I'm ready.
Go ahead.
Let me at it. So I think it's a great question. I think there's definitely a right response on both sides. Obviously, on one hand, do you need passion to start an effective, profitable business? Certainly not. But as a founder, if you're starting a business, being passionate about it is something that's really going to help you and assist you, because you'll be driven just from your personal interest to work on it more and think about it in your free time, and sort of it'll be something that you enjoy working on. Specifically in the Equivesto experience, if you're trying to equity crowdfund your business, it's very useful and helpful to have a founder who's passionate about what they're doing, and there's a purpose and a reason behind the business. Because when you're going out for funding, whether it's equity crowdfunding or to angels or even to a bank for a loan or anything like that, to bring passion and expression in your voice and in your explanation about why you're doing what you're doing is really going to help convince people of the validity of your idea, and that they should want to join you and support you on your journey. So while it's not necessary to start a profitable business, I think being passionate about what you're doing is definitely going to help you be more successful.
Anatoly, what do you think?
Yeah, well, to answer that question, I think we'd have to dissect what passion is. And what I think, or like I feel, that passion basically is a state of mind, right? Where you're like super excited, you really believe in something, and then you just like all of those rays of true belief are spreading out and convincing everyone around you. I would say that you definitely don't have to have passion to make a profitable business, because most of the time business is about business, not about the passion. Having it along the way is amazing. And the actual, like for me, like how it works for me, I think it depends on the goals and like the desire to achieve and the willpower of the founder to be passionate about something. So let's say if this specific business is playing well in my mid or like long term, and I really believe that it would make money so that I'm not lying to anyone around, I would be super passionate about it, because like it would help me move from this step to that step, and just make it happen, earn enough money to then keep doing whatever I'm really passionate along the way. So if this helps me achieve whatever I'm really passionate about tomorrow, I'm passionate about this as well, because it actually would get me there. So, and then I just have to, spread the feeling around. That's what I think.
I think it helps, but it's not a necessity, and it depends on what type of business you're trying to run and where you are in the process. I always tell people to follow their passion, because when you're pitching to investors, or when times get tough and you've got 10 employees and you can't figure out how you're going to make payroll on Friday, and you just don't know how you're going to make it through, are you going to get your butt off the couch and go to work and work your ass off to figure out a miracle to make it happen? Or are you going to give in and say, nope, I'm going to go find a day job or going to do something else? And if you're passionate about what you're doing, you're going to do the first. And if you're not, you're going to do the second. So it just, because you're at that wall. And that's the difference between, a lot of people jumping into the next, breaking through that gap and that chasm and taking things to the next level, and not. So it depends on where you're taking the business. Passion really helps selling, when you're selling to customers, when you're declaring a vision, when you're trying to get people to follow you, when you're trying to hire the best employees, when you're trying to pitch to investors. So, but you can hire passion. Go ahead, Anatoly.
So I have a question for you, Craig. So then, would you say that's passion, or is that over responsible feeling pertaining to the business and this willpower and endurance, like business endurance, that you take your ass off the couch and go solve the problems and convince your team that everything is fine?
I think what Craig is saying. Sorry, Craig. I think what Craig is saying is that the willpower is created because you're passionate about it. So the passion is the source, and it can lead you to a variety of different areas that will potentially create success. But one thing that maybe we want to consider including in the discussion is, we're really focusing on the startup period of the business. So when you're starting the business and it's a startup and it requires that like personal blood, sweat, and tears, you need that passion to sort of get it off the ground. But once your business has scaled, if you're still as obsessed with it, that can help you be a great leader, but also it can be challenging if it's actually now time for you to step away, and you don't necessarily have the personal skills to manage potentially a multi-million dollar business. And that's nothing against you as a founder. Obviously, you've created this massive business that's created a lot of wealth and everything, and that's excellent. But when it's time to step away, or you're looking for that external advice, that can, if you're super passionate about the business beyond everything else, it can actually make it challenging for the strength of the business itself, because then you become obsessed with doing what you feel is right, which might not actually be what's best for the business.
Well, I think ultimately where passion is going to become most important is not when things are good, right? When things are good, when you're at the very beginning, when you get some traction, anybody can succeed, right? Inevitably, at some point, likely at very many points, there's going to be difficult and hard times and difficult decisions and roadblocks and et cetera, et cetera. And I think, alluding to what Craig said, is that's where it can come into play and kind of make or break a company, especially in the long run. But I think an interesting maybe angle we can put on the word passion is, are we talking about passionate about that specific idea or business, right? I'm super passionate about equity crowdfunding. Or what I would say in my case, I'm not necessarily the most passionate about immigration. I didn't start practicing it until 3 years ago. I don't go read immigration books for fun. But what I uncovered through the industry is that I'm trying to solve a really big problem that I'm pretty passionate about trying to fix, right? Not because I live, breathe, and eat immigration law, but because after having spent so much time in it, getting so well versed in the industry, making connections, et cetera, it's like, wow, this is a pretty big and cool problem. I'm pretty passionate about solving that. So maybe a bit of a differentiator there as well to throw this whole thing on a bit of a loop.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. You referenced the equity crowdfunding. You know, I think for me, equity crowdfunding is actually a tool that I'm trying to use to really help other companies get the funding they need to be successful. If a company comes to us, but they're not a good fit, but they're able to go to a VC or an angel or complete their round in some other way, then that's absolutely brilliant. And I'm still very happy for them, because what we're passionate about at Aquavesto and myself is really about helping companies get off the ground and become successful, and creating opportunities for people who might not have opportunities in the current system, both investors and companies. So that's really sort of what drives us. So maybe it's not so much about being like, I'm passionate about spreadsheets or whatever it is, but it's actually, I'm passionate about helping others, or like solving this problem because I see that need, and then I've created this business to achieve that.
Yeah, entrepreneurship is hard, especially early on. And you know what I was saying, where only an entrepreneur will work 80 hours a week to avoid working 40, and it's true. And I think that's where the passion comes in. Is that if you really want to take something and quit your day job and work at it to make it a living, breathing entity, you're going to have to put a lot more work into it. And you really need to love that if you want to do that and survive. And, you're quitting a $120,000 job or a $75,000 job or whatever, and now you're working on this and making no money for 6 months and hoping at the end of it you're going to get a little trickle. At what point do you quit and go back to your work? This is the whole, you got to be passionate about what you're doing to stick that through the end and take it to the next level. And those people really, the ones, because it's hard, the ones who stick it through actually can make a difference and make changes and launch companies and do crazy successful things.
Yeah, I almost see that more, or read about that more and more as I read these biographies. You might even be able to see some of them behind me, like the Elon Musks, the Richard Bransons, the Steve Jobs. You guys know the list. Um, and I don't want to branch into another question, but like, how much is strictly sticking it out and like having the grit to actually fight through the hard times more of an indicator of success than any other metric, right? Oh, how much revenue did you have between months 3 and 6, right? It seems to be that all of these extremely successful entrepreneurs and tech companies came from people that just fought and didn't give up for longer than anybody else, right? So, and of course that does require being passionate about something, right? Whether it's the specific company, the industry, the products they're building, et cetera, et cetera.
I agree.
Right.
It's go ahead, Alex.
No, please, you started.
Yeah, so I agree. It's a bit like those polar, like Arctic expeditions, where you're just like marching through like cold and snow and winds. You don't know where you're going. Everyone's like dying around, and like you have no food, but you're still going there to put the pole in, and then just prove the point and go all the way back. Kind of similar feeling with doing business. No one believes, no one trusts. Then you get those crumbs and crisps and the feelings that people kind of buy in. And like even Bezos with Amazon, right? That like, hey, we'd be selling everything one day there, and you're like, you're crazy. And I get this similar feeling and react. I got similar reactions before. Now I'm better formulating what we do, but in the end of the day, we're trying to change something, communication, like email, right? We're potentially competing with email, and people are like, this wouldn't work. So yes, it requires that grit and that determination and that belief, and passion is the glue. I would agree with you guys that you use passion as the glue between vision, between your will, desires, and everything, this cloud of you, and you stick it in, and then you use that to convince others. And if you do that long enough, one day, maybe, hopefully, it would work out, right?
Yeah, I think something that's important, and it's great that we're sort of connecting these 2 points, but having sort of grit and determination in the face of all odds only works if you've happened to stumble on the right idea, right? And that's really the challenge, because if you're going along and you're getting feedback that, your idea doesn't work, how do you know as a founder whether this is just sort of naysayers that by just pushing through with your passion you can overcome it and you have a brilliant idea, and how do you know when it's actually someone being like, this is really not going to work, and then you're wasting your time? And so that's actually why I tie the passion back to that larger idea, because if you found a problem that people currently experience and your passion is about solving that problem, then even if your current solution, you're working on that and you take it to the end of the road and it's not getting where you need it to go, because your passion is about solving the problem, not this specific route you've chosen, you can take that learning and still move it to this other side and still try to solve the problem. And so you'll end up doing something that's of value instead of potentially being passionate about, everyone always makes the I think it's the Kodak example, right? They're like, oh, like we make film. That's what we do. Like we don't have, we're at this point in our market, we just make film for cameras. But actually what they do is they help contain memories. And so they were all obsessed about the fact that they make film, and then digital cameras come out and basically wipe out the market for film. And so they were just passionate about making film, not passionate about that bigger problem, which is helping humans record memories.
I think that's actually a good summary of what could be the answer here, which is find the intersection between passion and problem, right? Or a good solution for a problem. Because if you're passionate about something that won't make you money, it doesn't really matter how passionate you are, right? You'd probably be beating your head against the wall for quite some time. So maybe you take the road of passion, but you veer it to where it will match with market opportunity or profitability, and try and connect those lines.
I like to say VCs are looking for strong beliefs loosely held. So where you're passionate about this, but you follow the data, and you're still wanting to solve the problem in an industry, but the way you're going about it might change. You may find out you actually need to tackle a different problem than this problem in order for all these things to fall into place. Any number of things, but knowing that you're passionate about it, but that you are going to follow the data, talk to customers, pivot when you're trying to figure this out, because rarely does the idea that you're started with actually become the end product that you're successful with. I mean, I imagine everyone here has pivoted a little bit along the way. And I like to mention a company called Final Blueprint, which was one of the first podcasts I interviewed a few years ago. And that was Kevin Olds. You probably have heard of him, but maybe not under a different name. And he was trying to handle when you die, your digital footprint. What happens to your iTunes library, your digital movies? What happens to all this stuff you have online, your passwords? Where do they go? Who has access to all these things, all your accounts? But the one thing they kept getting asked about was wills, online wills and stuff. And they kept telling people, we'll get to that. But long story short, they're now called Willful. They've raised millions of dollars. You've seen Erin Burry's picture all over LinkedIn where she's promoting it. She now is working full time. They're married, Kevin and Erin. But you have to strong beliefs loosely held. You're trying to solve this problem. But when the problem is this big, maybe you can have to solve this problem first.
Right. You want to have that huge vision, but you want to start with one specific problem and do it very well, and then add. You don't want to be like, I will solve every problem you've ever had very badly.
And with that, what's the next question, Alex?
Perfect. So the next question is, why do 5-year projections matter or not matter for your startup. So either they do matter or they don't.
So let me ask two startups who have been seeking funding or are seeking funding. Who wants to start, Anatoly or Josh? 5-year projections.
I mean, I'll jump in. I have pretty strong feelings about both these questions. Why do 5-year projections matter for your startup? Because investors are going to want to see them. I guess it depends what type of round you're raising. If you're very early on doing a small round, like for us, we didn't get asked by very many investors for projections. We were mostly doing a friends and family round, so we didn't get asked too much for them. But the only reason I created them was for the investors who asked for them. Why do 5-year projections not matter? Because they're going to be 150% wrong. Can they be a good guideline for you in terms of like getting your ideas out of your head, putting them on paper, having some financial goals to work towards, et cetera, et cetera? Sure. But like, I think they're kind of a waste of time. I understand why some investors maybe want to see what your thinking is in terms of putting the numbers on paper. But I just felt like I was completely wasting my time putting together the whole, they asked for 3-year projections. I did 3 years. And it felt like a complete waste of time.
Anatoly?
Yeah, wouldn't necessarily tie it in directly with funding. And like if we're just like looking on the business holistically and like strategy and tactics, I would say that 5-year projections are more like a map through the jungle. And you have to cross from here to here, right? Like you have to cross the full jungle across in like 5 years. And that's your like profitability or whatever your ultimate goal is with the business. And then why it doesn't matter, the specifics why it don't matter, because you could go this way through the jungle, or there's a snake, or there's like a bear or something else, and you have to navigate your way in and out. And then there's
Snakes
a rainfall.
and bears in the same jungle. That's a scary jungle.
And you never know what happens, right? Black swans, maybe not as scary, but in the business world, a little bit more. And the tactics matter as of today and the next like a few months or like maybe like half a year, right? And the strategy matters. It's like your guideline. It helps your team. It helps you steer the business. It helps you convince your team, investors, other stakeholders, your co-founders that you're on the right route, you're going through the right kind of tendency somewhere up, and why it doesn't matter, because everything changes. COVID changed everything this year. Other situations change the businesses totally. Your co-founders might leave. The industry might be disrupted by Amazon tomorrow or Google, or something else happens, and then you're or totally out of business or totally pivoted. So that's where it doesn't matter at all.
Well, I see both sides of this again. You know, it doesn't matter because they're always wrong. Always wrong. I've never seen 5-year projections that are right. But from the mind of a VC, you know, this is often the true test of how insane a founder is. When you look at, all right, show me your financial projections. Like, all right, this is a test. Like, how do you plan on getting there? For VCs, again, this is a pure guessing game, and we understand that, and people understand that. It's just, what's your mind map? As you were hinting at earlier, Josh, is we want to understand how you plan on getting there, because I don't know if we've all been at pitch competitions, but I have, and there's always one person who up there says, if I only get 1% of the market, and my eyes roll. It's like, oh, great. That, if if is a really crappy word. You're like, what are you going to go home at night and toss dice and hope, pray or whatever you do that's going to happen? Or do you have a plan? So, instead of saying I'm going to get 1% of the audience, that 1% means 50,000 sales a month. That means 5 million hits. That means this, that means that. How am I going to get that traffic? What's the plan to make all of that happen? There's a chain to have that. So the 5-year projections for a VC are, what's your plan to get there, to move the needle? And we understand there's going to be bears and there's going to be snakes and there's going to be black swans or whatever along the way, and plans are going to change. But what's your basic plan and why? What's your logic that says you're going to be worth 10 million 5 years from now, and how do you plan on getting that and how you're attacking that market? And it's valuable for you because you need to understand what kind of company you're building. If you're doing these projections and you expect to be 100 million revenue in 5 years, what's your role in the company? You're at $0 revenue now. What's your role in 5 years? What's your team look like? What's the structure you need to build that? And are you planning that in along the way? So if you don't plan that, you'll find yourself in a lot of hot water later on when you haven't really thought this kind of stuff through.
Yeah, no, I think you've all, summarized it quite well. Definitely from our perspective, it's definitely the two sides. There's a lot of value in, 5-year projections to actually, get those assumptions to see, okay, where is your thought process? Like, are you looking into the details of, exactly like Craig said, okay, you want to hit 1 million in sales in year 3, but what does that mean you need to be spending in marketing, and what do you think your conversion rate will be, and how are you going to bring that in, and whether they're connecting all those dots?
But how can you possibly know your conversion rate 3 years down the
right,
road?
But no, exactly. So you're not.
It's all complete guessing.
Right. So you've made an assumption, but what are you basing your assumptions on? Have you done your research in the market? Have you found competitors with their conversion rates? What are those? I want to see how deep into the rabbit hole of research you've gone prior to coming and talking to me.
But
so I can
can't you ask that question? Can't you just be like, hey, in 3 years, what's your revenue goal? And, what are the conversion rates in your industry? Like, do I really have to tell you what my expenses are going to be in Q3 of 2023? You know what I mean?
Well, if you're doing 5 years, people shouldn't be asking you for quarterly or monthly 5 years. It should be like an annual. So you've just got the one whole year in a column kind of thing. And the idea is to see if you're able to think ahead and understand what, you're going to go through potentially rapid expansion. And even if you're meeting with the board member who's the VC or the lead angel investor, whoever it is, even if you're meeting with your board, on a quarterly basis while you're going through this, you're the one who's holding the reins and actually trying to pilot the business as you grow. And so all the little things that go into a 5-year projections, like, are you including potential bank fees? Like, are you like every little possible expense? Are you thinking about that and how that can impact you? Because businesses fail because of cash flow problems. It's that you run out of money in some way, you can't pay your bills, and that's when you go down. And so
I bet you more businesses failed because they spent too much time making cash flow projections instead of going and doing more sales and marketing. Like, I don't think going into some of those details is an effective use of time, especially because most people are just catering the cash flow to make the investor happy, which is also ironic, right? Because the investor needs to see, hey, these numbers make sense, but hey, these numbers also have to be crazy big enough. Otherwise, you're not $100 million company, so I'm not going to invest in you. So everyone's numbers are going to come in that vicinity of a range. Otherwise, they know they're just going to get a no answer anyways, right? So they're already being influenced. They're already wrong. And the business could just be out there hustling even more, trying to actually get back to work. So, I mean, I think you guys kind of know what my stance is, but I can see how they would be more important in subsequent raises, a seed, a pre-seed, especially when you have more business history and numbers to work off of. Absolutely. But for like a pre-seed family and friends round, like, it just seems totally like a waste of time for everybody involved.
Fair enough. Just to clarify, that I'm referring to at any stage of the business does having 5-year projections work. I agree. If you're in a sort of ultra pre-seed family and friends, then there's no way that you can really tie any numbers towards that for sure. One thing that you mentioned though that is important to keep in mind is exactly what you said about showing the investors the potential revenue generation. And definitely the challenge with going to angels and VCs is they're always looking for that 10x return. Equity crowdfunding, not so much, but either way, if you're putting projections out there, you're giving investors an idea. And so while you do want to put something high enough to get their interest and potentially get them involved, even though it's not a promise, it's kind of a promise. You're insinuating that this is your goal. And so you can actually dig yourself a hole where you've gotten these investors to invest and support you, but you've done it with these sort of astronomical projections that don't make sense. And so that essentially gives them license in the future to be like, hey, you didn't reach any of these targets that you initially put off. Like, it gives them a much stronger position for negotiation in the future, depending on, what's going on. So you also want to keep in mind of that potential negative implication of having too crazy a projection. And then at the same time, Craig, as you were mentioning, how crazy is the founder? You do need to show those somewhat astronomical numbers that are totally made up and make no sense at some point. But also, if you go too crazy, then I know that you're insane and you have no idea how to actually run a business. I think you definitely want to make sure that you have more than enough time, Josh, to operate like in the business, which is, boots on the ground, getting the sales, doing the marketing, actually getting all that traction and everything you need. But you still also need to have time to work on your business, which is the strategic thinking, the planning, the longer term stuff. And that's a little bit where financial projections can come in.
And on this great note, I'll try kind of branch off a little bit. So we're talking about 5-year projections, right? And let's maybe chat a little bit about 5-year planning overall, just to take the projections out of the scope right now a little bit. And how important is it to have 5-year, 7-year, 10-year, 20-year, 50-year key milestone strategic kind of polls there for you to plan ahead? Like, should you have that, right? Should you have it in mind? So, okay, and tomorrow we are buying, I don't know, Google. Up to that level, should you go there? Should you be that crazy or no? What do you guys think?
I think I'm just going to hop straight in. I definitely think you want to set strategic milestones for sure. I think probably up to that 5-year point, maybe 7 years is useful. It's really that sort of double-edged sword where you want to show your investors and you want to demonstrate that you have vision and you see a lot of potential, but you also want to be a realist at the same time. So it's that interesting combination where, if possible, you actually hold a little bit that sort of to your chest and you don't share that necessarily right away. So you'd give the first couple goals, which are achievable and very well grounded, and you'd sample a little bit of your dreams for the future, but you wouldn't go out and be like, we're going to buy Google in 30 years and everything. You'd sort of say, we want to reach a point where, we're making really solid revenue and we're able to take that funds and invest in, buying a competitor or some, showing that you have that potential breadth of vision, but you still want to have your more nearer term strategic goals really grounded in reality. A lot of startups will come and talk to me and they're pre-revenue, pre-sale. They haven't closed a single client. And they're like, okay, we're going to launch in 2 months. And we're going to have 10,000 users in 5 minutes. And that's our next month goal. And based on hitting that, we'll be able to convert at this really amazing rate. We're going to have a drop-off rate of like 1%. So everyone's going to stay. We're having massive retention rate. And that's how we're going to hit 100 million in year 5. And so you want to make sure that your immediate goals are really realistic. So you're like, okay, we're going to start with maybe 100 beta test users that I've asked personally to sign up. And then, on and on. And then that gets to the point where, okay, yeah, we bought Amazon and we bought Apple and we've turned it into this like world conglomerate like Berkshire Hathaway.
But knowing your facts, knowing your data, like I was talking to somebody, I can't remember who, but I'm exploring an interesting opportunity in the market, and we're going through a bunch of stuff. But I said, I'm approaching 50 companies with a pitch within 2 weeks, and I want 10 of them, 5 of them to respond, and I want to close 2 deals. And that'll give me a 4% conversion rate and a 2-week sales cycle time. And great, that's just a number. from a beta test from this, but it's a number to start. Now I go out to market and say, what is the industry standard in this? What happens? Where do I need to move? But having those numbers gives me a starting point. So I can say, all right, I know that if I approach 200 customers next time with this same thing, I'll get 8 sales. And that kind of stuff. So those understanding that is the key to doing these projections. So basically, the value of projection is finding out what your core KPIs are, what you really need to measure, what you need to be tracking, and what you need to get to the next level. So short answer, 5-year projections, early startups are really irrelevant, but your 3-year projections are a little bit more relevant. Your 6 months projections are extremely relevant. What are you doing now? What are you doing next week? What are you pivoting? What happens when you don't meet those milestones? But you can't just do a 5-year projection and leave it. You've got to really come into detail and then pivot these things as you go. So how far out you need to go strategically, understanding the market, return on ad spend, where you are now versus what the market is. Can you grow and change? I may find out that my conversion rate is way above the market because I'm doing a completely different approach in a subsector, and I've got maybe a little bit of a blue ocean going on here I never knew about. So I think it's nice to know that. And when you don't have sales, though, it's really hard to figure those things out.
Yeah, I think directly to Anatoly's question, similar to the financial projections, I think the importance kind of scales with where you're at in your company. If you're a big company, if you've raised multiple rounds, if you're the Amazons, the Apples, like you are planning 5, 10, 15, 20 years ahead. If you're Berkshire, you're doing succession planning, all that, founders are passing away or retiring, et cetera, et cetera. If you're early stage, I mean, I have kind of plans in my head for the next kind of 2 to 3 years. Anything beyond that, I just follow the grand vision of the company, because nobody's asking me what's our strategic plan 4 or 5 years from now, right? They want to know what we're going to do soon and what's the big vision for the company. So I don't have any plans or strategies for anything past like 2 or 3 years, because quite frankly, I have to get there first. But what I am using is that like 5+ year vision as the North Star, right? The big vision of the company to guide the decisions for now. I'll make, more strategic and in-depth planning for the next year, year and a half, maybe 2. But the rest is, heck, let's get there first. Let's survive that long, and then go into more detail.
Well, I agree if you're talking about fundraising, right? And if you're convincing someone that you're capable of, projecting stuff. But to provide more context, my question and my flow of thought was more pertaining to yourself as a founder, internally amongst the co-founders. And I think that it's important to expand the horizon a little bit more than 5 years. Why? Because it directly ties with the percentages you give away for your company. It ties with your strategic decisions, like should we partner with this company, and how would it affect us in 5 years, or shouldn't we? And it might change the direction of where you're going today. So you might be delusional, surely, right? Because you never know what happens tomorrow. But I tend to stick with the like 10, 20 year ahead grand vision and plans, right? And like this idea of how it should work. And then I roll it down to like the 3 year, like the 1 year, the 2 year decisions. And then would it align with that or no? And that's how I try to approach it. Because like you give away 70% of your company in the next 5 years, you're not able to give away anything else. You lose control, or like there's no more value in there. So I think that should be something as an important thing on the minds of an entrepreneur.
I think, as soon as you're more than just a solopreneur, as soon as you have other founders, having those longer term discussions is definitely important, because it's not just you. So you need to make sure, of course, you and your other founders are very aligned, or you work through sort of wherever there's any friction, so you can be quite aligned on that longer term vision. But in terms of, you mentioned the equity and, giving away equity and everything, but, if you're going to scale your company massively, by the end of it, you as a founder, like if you have 5 or 10% of your company and your company's like on the stock exchange and worth billions of dollars, then you control a massive percent of your company still. The fact that Bezos, owned whatever percentage it was of Amazon, is extremely high. But I think as founders, at some point you do give up that board control anyways. As soon as you have a board of 5 people and 2 of them or 3 of them are chosen by VCs, you're already lost majority control of your board from you as an individual. So part of the founder's dilemma is knowing at some point you will lose control, and being sort of okay with that, and making sure the people you bring in as investors are still going to help build towards that vision you've created. I know that was like a super tangent, but throwing it in there.
No, that makes total sense. And I would say, but that the thinking kind of pattern, the flow of thoughts changed from what it was even maybe what I'd say 70 years ago. Like all of those oil companies and steel companies, the principle was you don't give away equity, and you kind of do the sales, and then you scale it smartly, and then you attract a little bit of money. Maybe you just give like a small portion of your business out, and then you keep the ownership fully. And then when you go on the stock exchange, you still own a hefty amount of that. And now with like people trying to scale it real quick, take the market position, right? Like get these funds and scale, they dilute themselves in a crazy way, right?
So with that, what's the next question, Anatoly?
Well, yeah, it's an interesting question. So I've been thinking about this when I was jogging, and I was thinking sprints or marathons. What's the right tempo for startups? And how do you like apply the marathon concept to your startup, and when do you apply the sprint concept?
Who wants to start with this?
I mean, if Alex doesn't mind, I'll jump in. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yeah, your
Mike's
sound
okay?
just picked up a bit. Yeah.
It just
Okay.
came back, yeah.
I think you need both. And it kind of relates to the projections that we were just talking about, because I think if you don't have marathons, your sprints will be very choppy, and there won't, they might lose consistency, and you might lose that kind of North Star focus. And if you're only doing marathons, it's hard to stay as focused in the short term, and without having kind of shorter term milestones, you can lose motivation. When you're not tracking things as often, it can be less effective. So I think you should be coming up with marathons, and based off the marathon, break up the marathon into little sprints. That's probably a weak cop-out answer, but that's what I think.
Go ahead.
Sorry,
Alex.
go ahead. No, go, Craig.
Go.
I was gonna say, yeah, I think I agree. To me, it's really that connection between, the operational side where you're working in your business, and strategic side where you're working on your business, right? The marathon is this sort of longer term strategic goals that you've planned, that you're working, months on. And then the sprints are the incremental activities that you need to do to hit those goals. Obviously, if you're doing a sort of project management style and you're doing an agile project management, you're doing 2 or 3 week sprints if you're developing technology anyways, but not talking about project management, just talking about it in the running analogy. I definitely feel like there's going to be periods where you're going to need that really intense sort of 24/7 effort, like you're just going to market for the first time, or you're trying to close that first big client, or you're trying to hit this key metric or objective. But then there's times when it's not about, pedal to the metal 24/7. And sometimes it's about stepping back a little bit, making sure everything's running properly, and just making sure everything's moving in the right direction. You don't want to burn your team out every single week for, the first 6 months, so that you finally, you had your launch, and then you got going and everything. And then, okay, now when you need to potentially have another boost to ramp up, everyone's still dead from all of the nonstop work you've been doing before. It's definitely, you want to be malleable and adjust to what the situation calls for, I think.
As a project manager, keeping the running marathon, not the project marathon in, you build this kind of tempo into your projects. And I say that, I used to do a lot of implementation projects, and people would hire me and bring me on to do all the super complex stuff that no one else could do. And there's a ton of moving parts, but, over a 6 months, there's a project I'm thinking of off the top of my head, where it was a super secret project for the company. and they had just divested a portion of their business to another company, and they didn't tell anybody this. So we had to move multiple organizations across 5 physical buildings, separate them physically so that without really telling anybody what was going on, so logically we could now sell you as a unit to somebody else that we just did. And we had to separate all these systems, that were amalgamated, all the data was shared. And anyway, there's a lot of moving parts when you're doing all this stuff. But when you're talking about marathon, you plan this long thing out, but there are definitely sprints where you're doing long weekends where it's 24 hours, 48 hours doing implementation where, you have limited time to do it. Same thing with software when you're coming up to a release or the deadlines or milestones. You're really planning this long venture, but nothing ever goes. You have the bears and you have the snakes and stuff in your way. So the path is never the way you planned it. So those last few weeks or those last efforts are always a sprint to get something done. But I like the long-term planning of a marathon. We have all these things going on, but there are always sprints built into pieces of that work of your business, of those deadlines that you have looming.
Reminds me back of high school when everyone's like, "Oh, I have that big assignment that I'm going to do, and I'm going to do my outline and get all my sources ready." And then it's like 3 days before, and you're like, "Well, here we are again.
I should probably start now.
I should probably do it now."
And then the beer opens, and you're like, "Okay."
Wait, no, Craig, we're in high school right now.
Yeah. Sorry.
University then.
That's actually really great points. I agree with all of you guys. And I would just why I raised it in the first place was because there's this massive chatter around that you have to fail fast, right? And then keep iterating on your idea and whatever you're doing fast. And I agree with that, right? If you don't have anything solid, if the grounds are shaky. And it's interesting how the backbone of our today's podcast was that you have to balance, right, between this endurance, this vision, this passion, and then if you know that you're on the right path, you kind of don't go from it, you just stick with it, and that's where this endurance and this marathon thought that I had has to be tied in. If you want to get to the end goal, you have to have this strength and endurance to just make it, right? And then you use this small sprint to get enough traction, sales, check, tests, A/B testing, whatever happening around. And by those, you collect those to get enough and kind of validation for yourself that you're doing the right thing. And independently from the storms and the winds that happen around, you do the long run and you know that you have to get there. And that's where you kind of turn on this marathon thing.
I think that's really kind of what separates tech companies from most others, and where Craig's line of strong ideas loosely held comes into play, because my first soiree into business was law, right? I started my own practice, and in a lot of some of those service industries, it's pretty simple, right? I'm an immigration lawyer. Here are my services. You either want to buy them or you don't. And then I made the lovely decision to get into tech and learned really quickly that it's not as simple as creating a product or service and then it will just sell, right? Or it might not sell. Tech has this really cool, AKA terrible thing called product market fit, which is you're trying to build something that's never been done or sold before, that nobody has purchased this before. So not only do you have to figure out what it is, you then have to educate the potential buyers on what it is and then hope that they'll give you their money. So that's why even more so, I think in tech than any other type of business, you do need that long, or whatever you want to call it, long-term marathon type strategy, but you do have to be pretty nimble with your sprints or your short-term, whatever you want to call them, strategies, tactics, but keeping in mind that you do need market feedback. You have to be willing to adjust. If you're not willing to adjust, unless you just get it right the first time, which I don't know if anybody ever has, then it might be a tough journey.
It's like if your legs stop working, you don't finish the marathon. You have to stop, heal yourself, and then change the idea or the thing you're working on, right?
You learn to run with your hands.
Yeah,
handstand.
That's why talk about experimentation so much. We should always be experimenting. And I teach that in growth hacking. Teach that we're doing when you're coming from a startup point of view. You have only so much effort. You're limited resources and time. So you're putting it towards something you want a result. What is that result? Are you getting that result? Are you not getting the result? So do you keep doing the work? Do you change how you're doing the work? What has to give? And always looking at things through that lens changes things, rather than there's a lot of people who say, oh, well, I got to post stuff on social media today. Then I got to do this. Then I got to do this. Then I got to do this. Then I got to do that. Great. But how much of that is any of that is moving the needle? When was the last time you got a customer from social media? When was the last time, okay, well, maybe it is moving the needle for you, maybe it isn't. So why are you continuing to do those things? So you always have to do that lens. Otherwise, you're going to get dragged down with everyone else.
Right. You need that analytical data and that feedback, and then be able to sort of pivot on that.
And with that, I wanted to ask one final question about funding. As startups who have been involved or seeking funding, helping people seek funding, what do you feel are the biggest barriers for startups to get the capital they need? Is it actually themselves?
That is a great question. And I think probably given the opportunities that exist, I'm going to go out on a limb and say before equity crowdfunding, the answer was not themselves. But now with equity crowdfunding, yes, the answer is themselves.
Was this a Greg or an Alex question? Was this planted?
No. Well, I don't know if Craig planned it, but I appreciate the question. Definitely, I think it really comes down to your real preparation for going out to raise capital, and the work that you've done and the thought you've put into the business. And if you've prepared yourself properly and you're willing to put in the work to successfully get the funding, there are a lot more options than there used to be. And so, if we look sort of traditionally in Canada, there weren't as many options before. And so it was much harder to get funding. I think that landscape has changed a little bit recently. And so if you're willing to put in the time and effort and the preparation and the planning, then there's definitely funding that's out there and is accessible to many businesses.
I think when I say it's themselves, like there's a lot of work to getting funding, and it's not fun work. I always say you've got to, my rule of thumb is you have to talk to 100 investors in 5 weeks if you want to get funded. And, Josh, you've talked to a few investors. How hard of a slog is it?
It's a slog. It's a hard question to answer. I don't think I could name the biggest barrier to getting the capital you need. If I had to kind of summarize it to a couple, if you'll give me that flexibility, I would say number one, you need to get your company to the right place, right? There's based on like the recent kind of like hype of raising money, being a tech entrepreneur, all that kind of stuff, incubators, et cetera, it's kind of like the cool thing to do now, right? Is like go raise money. And so probably a lot of people do it preemptively. In fact, that was one of my questions if we had time to get to it. So number one is, make sure you actually get your company to a point where it is, valuable enough to be invested in, right? And that's a whole topic in and of itself on what exactly is that point. Number two, I think is the founders or founder putting in the work, because number one, there's a lot of it. And number two, there's just so much information, right? Like there's all these lists, it's almost like there's too many investors now, right? It's like you can get bogged down, like emailing 1,000 of them, but really you only fit the profile of 100 or 50 or whatever. So there's so much information. Just going out and scoping out people who would be good fits, trying to find warm intros, making those emails, setting up calls, following up, multiple rounds of conversations. So absolutely, a founder can be the biggest barrier if you're not willing to go through all of that. Like you got to commit to that 100%. I forget which book I read it in. It was one of the well-known tech books where it's like, you have to be all in 100% on the fundraise. If there's any doubt that you shouldn't be, or that you can't basically commit a full-time job's worth towards it, then don't even bother. And then lastly is, it can be tough dealing with investors. right? Like investors are busy people inherently. They're not all great with email. It can be hard to set up phone calls. If you're trying to set up 6 calls in a day and one of them starts late, well, what if that bumps back another one, but you don't want to disrespect that person's time, right? And then trying to get email responses from a bunch of them. So if I could kind of summarize, it would be number one, get your business to where it, is in a position where you're confident to fundraise for it. You have to be able to put in a lot of the work. And then, whatever you can do to try and make it as easier on investors or give investors a push, it can be a hard landscape just in general to navigate.
Any thoughts, Anatoly?
Yeah, well, I could only summarize it a little bit because I totally agree with what was mentioned before. And I would say that you need the if you want to fundraise. So the question was, what's the biggest
It was
barrier
about
here,
to
right?
get the capital they need. It doesn't always have to be fundraising.
Well, the capital, right? Like, is it yourself that you can't or can do that? I think first of all, it's determination that like you really have to do that. Secondly, as Josh correctly mentioned, you have to bootstrap for some time until you're actually fundable. And indeed, it is a 30 hours per week exercise for a few months. There's a preparation cycle, and there's the execution cycle, and then there's the closing cycle. So you spend a lot of time doing that. That's almost like a full-time job. So you have to have a team that would keep the business growing while you're actually doing that, right? Or someone, because you wouldn't be able to raise a proper round and keep your business growing. So that's another thing to consider. And I agree that there's a lot of people jumping in thinking that it's kind of fun, and it in a few previous years it actually worked a little bit, but now with COVID, everyone got a little bit more stringent. So these are the golden days of bootstrapping. That's what I would say, until you reach a specific point in like sales and like traction and understanding and value that you could generate and that you could then sell to someone. That's where you start doing that. And then, yes, one of the main barriers that I see is understanding the landscape, which Alex mentioned. You almost don't want to jump in too early without understanding how everything works and then say, hey, I want to raise $1 million right now because I have this great idea. It doesn't work like that. You have to kind of work a bit, chat with a few investors beforehand, maybe, try sell your stuff, chat with other founders, then chat with everyone once again, and then chat with everyone once again until you reach a point where you actually understand what's happening, who gives money for what do you have to have for that, and then you decide if you want to embark on that journey or no.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I think the most important lesson that I was reminded of, going to raise capital for my business a few years ago was investors are already invested somewhere else. All of the money that you're going to try to get, you need to imagine that it's already deployed in some other investment. And whether that's a short-term or a long-term investment, it doesn't matter. Every cent in the entire world is already deployed somewhere. And you're trying to convince people to take the money out of that and put it in you instead. It's not, there's a big pot. I deserve a piece of this pot of this money. There's like $1 billion right here. Like, my company's fantastic. I'll make you return. Why not? No, they've already invested in Tesla, but it was Tesla like 3 weeks ago when it was like going like this instead of where it's going like this right now. So the money's already invested somewhere fantastic. So you have to say, okay, you want to take your money out of wherever it is and put it in me. And this is why. And so you have to be really clear on your vision. You need to be ready to do that. And you have to be willing to put in the work to bother people enough to talk to you even, and sort of, but not being rude. It's that nice dance. I was reading there's another great book on raising capital from VCs called Venture Deals.
Brad Feld, it's the best. Yeah,
it's sort of like the first book you should read. But in it, he actually talks about, okay, when you're going out and you're going to go talk to an investor, maybe you want to actually like say like, look, thank you for your time. Like, here's $100 gift certificate to the keg. Like, thank you for talking to me. You want to create like every single interaction. Oh, I can't exactly remember if it was Brad's book or another one, but every interaction you have with a potential investor, even if they're not interested and they're not willing to talk to you, you want it to be positive, so that when, you give them that update in 2 years and you're at a different stage, maybe they are interested, they have a really great memory of working with you. But again, having said that, it requires you to have a bunch of money to give out a bunch of gift cards. I remember reading that section and being like, okay, another reason why only rich people can start businesses right here. Every investor you talk to, you're giving out $100 gift card, like you'd be out 10 grand in a week.
That's right. I could quickly add on like real quick to that. One of the leaders from the Founder Institute who oversee the funding lab, they've mentioned that like a specific founder from the Valley is actually constantly building relationships with investors at any given point of time. If those are investors who fund at any stage, you want to build the relationship instantly, even if you would need them in like 2 years or like 3 years. You want to start today so that you have your face flying there, everyone knows you. The keg gift card was a great example. That's, I think, even maybe an overkill for a startup, because investors would be like, so you're giving me $100 kegs.
Yeah.
But that's really cool if you're in like let's say a later stage, if you're raising like seed, or like not seed, but like A or B, that's amazing. I mean, that's something that you thought of, and you're showing your diplomacy skills in the end of the day.
Yeah, just building on that, I kept a running list from the day we started our company, just a Google sheet. I had no idea if and when we were ever going to raise money, but I kept a spreadsheet of contacts that I was making, because I think networking is hugely important no matter what stage of your company. If you're a founder of any kind, even if you're technical or you're not in sales or marketing or the CEO. So I kept a running list of people who I'd connected with, and we didn't raise for the first 11 months. And what that meant for me was that at the 11th month mark, I had a list of like dozens of people that I could then reach out to and say, hey, so-and-so, we're starting our raise, wondering if you're interested, or do you know anyone that might be interested, et cetera, et cetera. So I would say keep a running list no matter where you're at in your company, what stage, if not, you'll even raise in the future. Keep a running list. And now, having gone through a first fundraise and having been told many times no, everybody who said no when I asked, can I keep you updated, said yes. So now I'm continuing to build that list, and we'll send updates every probably 2-ish months to that list to keep those people warm, so that if there is a subsequent fundraise, be it 12 months from now or whatever, that's my jumpstart right there. So any advantage you can give yourself is helpful in this world.
We lost your mic there. You right there, that last little bit, it dropped. But it's interesting. Startups need capital, and I like to say, sales is better than funding. And a lot of people are just come to say, oh, where do I get money? Well, sale, make, you if you sell something, you're making revenue, and you're not giving up percentages of your company to do so. And VC and angel investment money is usually the most expensive money you'll ever get. So people need to switch their mindset around, I need funding, and more along the line is, how does my startup create revenue?
And I would jump in, sorry, just like I have a great point. I totally share Airbnb's founders kind of approach in their early days. Like, if you need to sell cereal to make your Airbnb project, you go and sell something. If like immediately right now your platform is too complex to kind of make it happen and then to be sellable, well, find anything else that you're able to sell and just sell it and fund it yourself, right? That'll be the best approach. If you're a founder, if you know how to sell, use your skills, go sell books, go sell boats, go sell anything else, and then fund this and make it happen, and then raise, maybe if you need to, for like growth capital.
Was anyone else going to jump in on that? Sorry, Alex, go ahead.
Well, no, yeah. If you obviously, I totally agree. If you can grow your business without giving up any equity, that's definitely the most optimal way to go, right? Growing from the sales and doing things that way for sure is the best way to go. At the same time, you want to make sure that you're still willing to take on capital when the business does need it. And there's a lot of founders who will come and sort of talk to us and say like, okay, like the most I'm willing to give up of my company is this, because if I raise these more rounds in the future, I need to make sure I maintain 50% of the company myself. And something that's always worth keeping in mind whenever thinking about capital sources or raising money is really that key founder's dilemma. Do you want to own 100% of a dollar, or do you want to own 10% of $100 million? And so deciding, when you're willing to give up and what, and when you're willing to give up that control and who you're going to bring in instead, having that sort of look in the mirror, I guess, or chat with the co-founders so that you're cognizant that depending on what you're trying to create, it might not be possible to have everything finished and build it out right from the get-go, because maybe you are not the technical founder. So you can't work a day job and then build this piece of software, in your backyard in the evening. But just, be willing and cognizant that you may need to make those choices, and knowing exactly what you're willing to do to make your business successful, even if it eventually becomes not a majority your business.
It's important to be able to understand all those things. And when I say make sales, that's because a lot of startups come to me and say, I've got a great idea, but I need $1 million. It's like, okay, great, but how have you proven the idea? Data talks. I've got 10 clients. I've got this. I've got so many sales. It's a different situation. If I talk to a lot of investors, and some people don't know this, but there were years ago I was talking about raising a fund, and at first investors were, I don't know, but 2 years into just doing what I'm doing, they started coming to me because I kept consistently growing TorontoStarts, doing this, introducing the good startups, and all of a sudden they started paying attention. When I started feeding them good startups that they were interested in investing in, they started paying attention to what I was doing. So it's a question of, I believe you need to start the VC relationship long before you need money. Stop asking for money and start working on advice and growing your business, because if you can get the sales, if you can, you're much longer along the way. And when you go back to that investor like Josh is doing now, a year or two from now, and he's saying, okay, we've done this, we've taken it to this level and this level, would love your advice, and maybe even, this might be a great time for you to come in. You've already warmed up. You're going to keep them informed of your relation. It's a completely different situation now. You're not coming in cold. They've seen you at different stages, and you've actually taken it upon yourself to go generate revenue and do these things. So all these things add to your readiness, as well as building the relationships and building that network, so you can have that long spreadsheet when you're ready to go out talking to people.
I have a kind of a small note and like a small add-on to that.
Sure.
Like how interesting it is that like Toronto becomes this like hub for IT and everything, and that it's amazing, Craig, that you keep doing this and supporting all the projects for which I am thankful personally from the Pact side. And it's interesting how like you bring early stage projects together. There's a few other hubs for innovation like Community Tech, Mars, Founder Institute, and so on. Josh helps companies to actually move in. Alex funds them. And Pact would help them do business, like actually close the deals. And you, Craig, with a few other respectable people, are like the godfathers and mothers of of the ecosystem.
Well, that's a very interesting way to put it, and I'll take that as a good analogy rather than a mafia analogy, more like a godparent, they're taking care of their kids.
Yeah.
I really appreciate everyone taking the time today. This has been great and interactive, and we only did get to one question of everybody's. It's just because we take so many diversions, and it's already 8:15. Thank you, everyone, for your time. And just last one more time, if people want to find you and get a hold of you, we'll start with you, Josh. Who are you and where do they go?
Yeah, if you or anyone you know is interested in immigrating to Canada, definitely check out visto.ai, visto.ai, or you can find me on LinkedIn, Josh Acknow. Just make sure to spell my last name right. If you have any questions or you want to connect, that's the best way to get me.
And Alex?
Yeah, so Alex, co-founder and managing director of Equivesto. If you're looking to invest in startups or small businesses starting at $100, or potentially raise funds from your own community up to 1.5 million, equivesto.com, EQUIVESTO.com, or on any social media, anywhere. I think even TikTok, Equivesto. I don't know if we posted anything, but
TikTok is huge, man. You got to get on it.
That's right. Yeah, just Google Anatoly Pact, P-A-Q-T. You'd find me on LinkedIn, or you'd find Pact Chat, our app for agreements and deals. That's how you would be able to find me.
Thanks again, everyone, and check out upcoming events at torontostarts.com/events. And thanks, everyone, for taking the time to be a part of Startup Face Off today.
Thanks for having
Josh.
us, Craig.